Why is Apple finally jumping on the Smart TV bandwagon? And why is Google killing off its tiny streaming music adapter? Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin. Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm what's left of Adam Turner, having survived another big CES tech show in Vegas, but Alex Kidman's still AWOL this week as we go behind the headlines in search of the big picture. Instead, we've got two great guests this week in the Vertical Hold studios. First, we're joined again by Aussie freelance tech journo Peter Wells, who, like me, writes for the tech pages, The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Peter, welcome back to the show.
Why, thank you. It's good to be here.
And joining us once again is our editor, Fairfax technology editor, Tim Biggs. Tim, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
So the Fairfax tech mafia has taken over the show again. Of course, I, for one, welcome our new overlords at 9, but I can't quite bring myself to let go of the Fairfax name yet. Maybe next summer we can get Warney and Bill Laurie on the show to talk tech. Anyway, let's skip the news and jump straight into it. So, guys, the iPhone 11 rumours have been flying thick and fast this week. Tim, what have you heard? What do you believe?
Well, I guess the earlier ones were very concerned with the camera. There's been a few leaks coming out saying that Apple is going hard in the sort of expanding number of cameras on the device with 3 on the back, similar to what we've seen from Huawei and a few others. And the first sort of renders that came out looked kind of hideous, I thought, but as we've gone, it looks like the rumors and leaks are kind of backing it up. So we're looking at another 3 iPhones, I think, the biggest one with the crazy cameras, and then the others sort of similar to what we saw last year. And then there's also stuff like they're saying they're going to get rid of the notch at the top or at least reduce it. I'm not sure exactly how they'd do that. And other things designed to lower the price a bit or lower their profit margin, I suppose, sort of getting rid of the 3D touch. So yeah, it looks like another sort of similar iPhone, but could have some interesting tweaks.
Pete, why do we want 3 cameras on the back? What does that do? I understand why you might want 2, because then you've got your sense of depth for those Belkin photos. I think it is with the fuzzy background, but why 3?
I guess that would be for a wide angle lens. So right now you've got the telephoto and you've got the zoom, but you don't really have that wide angle. And LG have made phones in the past that have had one camera that's specific for the wide angle, and no one really seems to want that, as the reason to have 2 lenses. But I can see them. I don't know. I mean, the iPhone has always defined itself by its camera. So I can see them wanting to do something that is really obvious as a step up for the camera, something that, you can look at and know, okay, that is definitely the new and improved camera. I don't know how much they can do with it. But yeah, I mean, I guess where a phone needs to make its strength is in the software and jumping between lenses. You can't really get any kind of decent depth from a lens to a sensor on a 4mm phone. So you really do need to have a bunch of different lenses and play around with it. Has anyone held that weird Nokia that has like 14 lenses on the back?
No, it sounds like a potato, like covered in eyes.
Yeah, I thought this iPhone kind of looks like it's got. It almost looks like a weird power adapter from an Eastern European country or something. It's
yeah. The renders that have come out with the 3 lenses sort of offset really upsets me just to look at it. Like, I understand that there's probably an optics reason that you would have them aligned in a certain way, but sort of, I know on the Huawei phone there's sort of 3 and then the flash aligned in like a square grid and it looks fine. But when you sort of twist it and have them in like a weird triangle with another one off to the side, it just doesn't seem very Apple to me. So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
You don't think Jobs would have signed off on it?
No, definitely not.
So they're also talking about perhaps moving to USB-C, which of course is quite likely because we've seen USB-C on an iPad. Do you think iGadget lovers ready to let go of Lightning and they still cross about the old 30-pin connector switch to Lightning?
I would happily move to USB-C on my iPhone. I wrote, a couple of years ago now on the MacBook review that Apple have kicked an own goal when it comes to USB-C because I've got, their most expensive laptop and I can't plug anything. I can't plug their most expensive phone into it, and that drives me nuts. The fact that they've moved the iPad to USB-C last year, if anything, it would almost frustrate me that they didn't move the iPhone at the same time. That would have made a lot more sense. It would have made less cables in my bag, but I guess better late than never. I would happily see them move to USB-C on the phone. I really wish they would do it straight away. So yeah, I'd be happy for this, but I'm skeptical until I see it.
And Tim, do you think that the blowback that they're getting for iPhones becoming so expensive and the fact that people are putting off their upgrade cycles to 3 years or more now, do you think Apple would ever cave in and bring out an actual cheap, not just a cheap by Apple standards, but a really cheap iPhone, or do they not care?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think one of the big problems facing Apple is that less expensive phones and phones from other manufacturers are getting really, really good. I've just been using a Nokia 7.1. It costs $500 in Australia, and it's really good. There's a lot of people who would have trouble justifying like an extra $1,000 on top of it for the little bits of extra, goodness that you get out of the top of the line iPhone. So I think, and given some of the other moves I've seen Apple make, and I think we're going to talk about it a bit later, but finding new ways to get their services and their content in front of more people, it becomes more and more important to get phones to people, at any cost, so that you can serve them more things to consume. So I think absolutely we'll see a push to get that Apple device at a more sensible cost. Because aside from the fact that people are upgrading less and less excited about smartphones overall, the sort of abundance of really, really good, less expensive phones, I think, is key.
So the sort of segueing into the next bit is this is the year that we think we'll finally see Apple's subscription video service, yeah?
Yeah, it's, I mean, all signs point to it. You've been to CES and you've seen all the several televisions, I guess, that are starting to put Apple hooks in there. And it seems like Apple's really shifting to that sort of content model. They've done it already with music. It seems like they're ramping right up.
But they've never gone down that path of we'll sell the hardware cheap because we know we'll make the money back on the software and services. They've always kept that premium price to make sure that they're making profit on the actual hardware itself. I'm wondering, like, I know they obviously making a lot out of the Apple Store, a new video service. Could you see them crossing that threshold where they actually become primarily a content and services provider, and that the hardware is almost, you could almost give it away just to get people in the ecosystem, the way that, we'll say, Amazon will sell you an ebook reader so damn cheap because they know you're now one of us?
I'll jump in for that one. I would say definitely no. It depends what part of their ecosystem you're talking about. Apple tend to be the company that either want to be the high end of a market or not in the market at all. So I feel that the fact that we're seeing iTunes and things like that moving into Samsung TVs and LG TVs just means if you are a fan of the Apple TV, you might be a little bit sad in the future. I don't think we're going to see another refresh to the Apple TV anymore. I think they've just decided, they always said it was a hobby, and now it seems like it's a hobby that has run its course for them. They don't want to sell that hardware anymore, I'm guessing. I mean, which is a real shame, because I still think the Apple TV is so much nicer than the built-in smarts of my current TV. And I still never use it because it's still one extra HDMI switch that I have to make. So I use the kind of crappy interface that's built into my smart TV, even though I know just one HDMI connection away is a much nicer interface. And I think they've understood that it was never nice enough to charge $300 for, they probably need to just let it go now. But that, I don't think that means anything when it comes to the Mac and the iPhone. I think they're still two massive things that they will happily sell you at a massive premium if they can. It's just services is that they're looking at services purely on that TV side of things.
So just to recap for people who are playing along at home, we didn't really touch in it in last week's show at Vegas, but one of the announcements we got early on, actually, Samsung announced it on the Sunday before the show even started, was that Apple services are now going to be built into televisions for the first time, but it's sort of a mix and match depending on which vendor it is. So Samsung has exclusive access to the iTunes app. So you'll now be able to get into the iTunes store, hire movies in 4K, HDR, hire TV shows, all the kinds of things that in the past you would have needed an Apple TV and either hide it on the Apple TV or hide it on your phone and sent it through the Apple TV to your television will now be on the TV. Samsung has the exclusive on that, but it's not an indefinite exclusive, so that might turn up in other TVs down the track. Meanwhile, Samsung is, hang on, I've got to get this right. Samsung, LG, and Sony are also adding AirPlay, which means if you've got an iPhone, you can fling, or an iPad, you can fling things straight from that device to your television without needing the Apple TV to be the middleman. A bit like with a Google, you can fling it to a Chromecast, which runs into the TV. So they're building AirPlay into TVs. And then the third thing that Samsung didn't get, but LG and Sony have, I want to say, is HomeKit. So the TV can actually tap into that Apple ecosystem. They won't run Siri on the TV because Apple don't like to run Siri on third-party devices, but you'll be able to talk to Siri on something like a HomePod and boss your TV around. So Apple's really held off on all this in the past because they always want you got to buy our stuff. This is the first time you'd ever actually be able to rent a movie from the iTunes store without owning any Apple hardware. Do you? I couldn't, because it's only it's only a handful of TVs. Samsung's only retrospecting this to last year's TV. I couldn't see him ditching the Apple TV just yet, Peter, because I think it'll be a few years at least before there's a critical number of TVs out there that can do this.
I think you're right, actually. And yeah, it's and look, to be honest, in Tim Cook's Apple, nothing ever dies. It just kind of sits on a shelf until people stop buying it. So I think the Apple TV probably might get a price drop in the next 6 months, and then we'll see it just kind of fade there as that final version of the hardware that just sits around, like you said, for the people who have TVs that are a little bit older. So yeah, I can see that happening. It really is cool to see AirPlay though coming to the main TVs, because that just seems like something that Apple should have done years and years ago to kind of open up that ecosystem. That almost probably would have killed Chromecast before it even kicked off if they had opened up AirPlay when they first developed it. So yeah, good to see that happening. I think this is all pretty kind of good. It shows that Apple understand where they're getting kind of stretched and where they need to focus.
So Tim, how do you fling video around in your lounge room?
Well, I use Google Cast mostly just because I don't tend to have a lot of Apple devices in use around the place. But I am excited for the prospect of an Apple that is a bit more loose with its services, because even if it doesn't eventuate that they start making less expensive Apple devices, that's not to say they couldn't end up having a lot of their services on non-Apple devices. We already see Apple Music on Android phones, for example, and so there'll be some things that they're still going to want to certify, like HomeKit, but then there'll be other things that are purely software, like probably their video streaming service. So yeah, for me at home at the moment, it's all Google stuff. But I think it would be smart if Apple sort of kept going along this line where someone like me would have no problem. I don't need to free up a HDMI slot. I don't need to buy new devices, but I can recognize that, they have the best library for a certain kind of content, or they have a best service somewhere, and I can easily grab it.
So there was talk for years that Apple would actually build a smart TV that I always thought was insane because TVs are such a cutthroat market. Why the hell would you want to get into that? Do you think that that is now well and truly dead? Do you think it ever made sense that Apple would want to build a TV?
Yeah, I think that's probably a bit far gone at this point. We're getting really to the point where the software is the be all and end all. And I just don't see it. You know, there's a limit to what they could bring to a product like that. And as you say, it's not an easy sort of product category to get into. They already make great computers. They make an Apple TV for now. They make devices that let you send content straight to a television, and they're getting into televisions. I just don't see any reason why they would make their own TV.
Yeah. So, Pete, there was also talk of basically an Apple equivalent of a Chromecast, a little streaming dongle cheaper than an Apple TV, which people assume they bring onto the market at the same time as they launch their new video service this year to help people get into the ecosystem. Now that they're putting it into your TVs, do you think we might still see that for those people whose TVs aren't ready for it, or do you think that that idea is dead? Where do you reckon it sort of fits into Apple's big picture?
I would love to see that. I would absolutely love to see that.
I would too.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a Chromecast at the moment that sits in my bag, in my travel bag, which I never really use, but it's there. I really like the Chromecast. I love how simple it is, and I can imagine, just in terms of enterprise would kill for something like that. They would love to have every meeting room that you go to have an AirPlay device somewhere. So especially as we move to dongle town on all of Apple's products, maybe that's the long game that they were playing all this time. But I think that would be fantastic. And like you said, it is the thing that bridges over for the people who aren't buying a new TV anytime soon, and don't see the value in getting a $300 Apple TV, which is what the current kind of price is. It really is. The Apple TV is so good in terms of software, but nowhere near as good as it needs to be what, $250 more than a Chromecast.
Yeah, and there's two versions. If you don't have a 4K TV, you can get a cheaper. I think the non-4K Apple TV is $200 and a bit, maybe dollars in Australia off the top of my head. But then you're looking at another 100 or so for the 4K one, and it supports Dolby Vision as well, which is interesting. Samsung is the first TV maker to have iTunes built in, and it's a 4K TV, and it does standard HDR, which is high dynamic range, so you see a bit more detail in the highlights and the shadows. But Samsung doesn't work with Dolby Vision, which is like fancy advanced HDR, because Samsung's in bed with Amazon, and they have their own competing format called HDR10 Plus, whereas Netflix and LG sort of back Dolby Vision. So it's like the battle lines have been drawn, and Samsung's kind of stuck in the middle there. So it'll be interesting to see if it comes to, we'll say, an LG TV once the exclusivity window is over, you will get that extra benefit of Dolby Vision. So, guys, speaking of streaming things around your home, one of the easiest ways to give old speakers a smart makeover has been for a long time to plug a Chromecast audio dongle into it. So it's a little disc about the size of your palm. You give it USB power. You plug it into the input jack on speakers, and now those speakers show up on your home network as a Chromecast audio speaker. So you can, if you've got a Google Home, you can send music to it. You can do it from your computer, from your iPhone, from your tablet. Google's decided we don't need them anymore. Apparently, they only cost $50. They're fantastic, but they're not making any more. Pete, is this a mistake? Do you think that they've got big plans that we don't quite understand yet, or they just don't want to sell cheap stuff anymore?
I never understood where it sat in the market myself. I'd thought about getting one once or twice, but I didn't see the need to get one over a standard Chromecast. And I think it was about a week or two ago, the standard Chromecast that normally only does video got a software update where it could be used in just audio mode anyway. So that is something for me, as someone who has, like I just said, I've got a Chromecast sitting in my travel bag that I never use. Maybe I could use that somewhere. But it just seems like what they'd probably more want me to do is buy a Google Home Mini, and hopefully I would love to see a Home Mini with an audio out. They do support Bluetooth to a speaker, But it's just there's a little bit of lag there, and it's not always the greatest thing, and the speakers can kind of lose connection with each other. So I would much rather, just like the Echo Dot has, just a little audio out. I think that would be a great improvement to the Google Home Mini, and that would, I think, fix any issues people had with the Chromecast audio going away. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's always been one of the differences between, like, the Echo Dot and the Home Mini sound terrible. They're fine for listening to audio, and that's about it. They don't even sound as good as the music coming out of the speakers on your phone. But as you say, the strength with the Echo Dot is it's got that nice line out. Perhaps we'll see a Home Mini with a line out. That would make sense because, like, I've got 5 Chromecast audios spread around my house. It was 4. I went out and bought another one when I heard that they were selling out, because I've got, fancy Harman Kardon speakers and stuff around the house that I'm not in a rush to throw away, but I really want to fling music to. So for me, it always made perfect sense. And that's one of the things that, the three of us always have to take into account as product reviewers, is that just because it doesn't make sense for you doesn't mean it doesn't make sense for anybody. I'll look at some things sometimes and think, why the hell would anybody want one of these? But I've always thought the Chromecast audio was a really good fit. Tim, how do you fling music around your house? Is there room for a Chromecast audio or some other solution?
Yeah, actually, I used to have a few Chromecast audios plugged in because I had I had a big sound system attached to my TV, and it was kind of old, but it was really good, and I had nice speakers, and so it was great to just take up one of the auxiliary ports with a Chromecast audio. Then all of a sudden, you can just fling anything from your phone. It works fine. I think maybe the time for them has just kind of passed. I think the landscape has changed a bit to the point where there's Google Cast and also Assistant going into so many different products. It's not even just Google products. A lot of speakers now, you can cast to them as well as Bluetooth, or you can press a button and just talk to the Assistant. And yeah, I think that's just the reality now. There's fewer and fewer people who are using dumb speakers, I think.
Yeah. It still seems like a bit of a jerk move to me. It seems like a bit of an Apple move of, screw you guys, we don't want you to have this anymore, so we're taking away. I don't understand when it's so cheap and works so well and brings people into the ecosystem where once you own one of these, you probably will decide that the next speaker you buy will be a proper smart speaker. It's like that stepping stone. To me, it makes perfect sense to keep it.
There's always a cost in keeping hardware going. There's support costs to any of these kind of things. So I think it makes sense if the sales just aren't there to kill it. And look, my 3-year-old can walk into the kitchen right now and say, "Hey Google, play Moana." And she will know that she'll get the soundtrack that she wants to listen to. She doesn't have a phone that she can fling music from to a speaker. So, it's better that they focus on her, a 3-year-old, the emerging market, than they do focus on, sorry, Adam, but you.
That's true, but I can understand as well. My kids are a bit older than you guys. My kids are 12 and 15, but they don't have their own smartphones yet. And again, it's really democratized access to technology and music in the house because they can walk into a room and ask for their music and not be like, oh, can I just borrow somebody's iPad or iPhone for a minute? So that does make a lot of sense. And I think the Echo Dot model, where you give a speakers a smart makeover where you can talk to them but still get good audio, makes the most sense. I first started flinging music around the house using the AirPlay back when they had, and I'm not even sure if they still sell them, they'd sell you a full airport, which was like a proper wireless base station. But then there were these little airport express things that were just like big power packs that would plug into the wall. They also worked as Wi-Fi extenders, plus they had an Ethernet port on them, but they also had a 3.5mm line out. So you could plug a speaker into them, and then any of your devices that did AirPlay, that showed up as a speaker. And for a couple of years, it was rock solid. And then it got very hit and miss. Every update fixed it and broke it and fixed it and broke it. And that's when I started looking at, Sonos and Google as well. So Apple kind of, again, could have owned this space. If Apple had, instead of doing this Frankenstein all-in-one Airport Express, had actually come out with its equivalent of an AirPlay dongle to give your old speakers a smart makeover, I think they could have totally owned this market.
I thought it was magical. I can still remember. I guess it probably would have been about 2005, flinging music from a very old laptop to an Airport Express and just blowing my mind doing that. So rest in peace, Airport Express. You paved the way for a lot of great technology.
Well, that about wraps it up for another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks again to Peter for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Adam.
And thanks again to Tim.
Thanks, gentlemen.
As always, listeners, we love to get your feedback on the show, so feel free to comment via Twitter, the Vertical Hold Facebook page, and thanks for listening. We're on a big push this year to reach more people, so it really helps if you can jump on iTunes or your podcasting platform of choice and leave us a review to help spread the word. Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin. All right, I forgot where I was going to go next. Let's stop and have a very quick briefing chat.